Anyway, we will try to do just that for you this afternoon. First up is Tom Nolan, whose work has appeared in the literary magazine Many Waters and Vanguard Voices of the Hudson Valley. His wife Carol, who's in the audience, describes his fiction as, quote, a little twisted. She may be understating. He will read Small Town Santa, a fiction. Beware.
Well, Larry has left a whole bunch of stuff on top of my reading.
Aren't you giving my stuff?
So that was not extemporaneous, he was actually reading it. Those of you who have, just a little preface here, those of you who have heard me read before recognize that my wife is generally right. This is in response to a dare from my writing group for me to write something that wasn't a little twisted. So this is the result of that. It's called Small Town Santa. Jimmy Stevens examined his almost white beard in the tack room mirror. He could hear Ezra Hyde outside talking to the two dappled gray Percherons as he harnessed them to the big red sleigh. Adjusting his pillowed belly, Jimmy took one last look, donned his Santa cap, and stepped into the frigid evening. "Watch where you're stepping," Ezra warned. Hopping over the steaming pile, Stevens surveyed the cargo area, bulging with two large cloth sacks, one red and one white. "Which one's the girl's?" Hyde clipped the last lead to the doubletree and straightened, pressing his hands against the small of his back. "White, and Dora says, just remember, little girls is pure as snow." In front of the team, Jimmy stopped to stroke boots and socks on their soft noses. "Ezra, why do you hitch these two old boys? Either one of them could pull the whole stable into the town." "Oh, yeah? But they're so pretty together. And they like the kiddies." He sorted the reins in his gnarled fingers. Jimmy climbed up and sat, gasping as the cold hit him. Ezra laughed. "Hell, Jimmy, you've been at this nigh 20 years, and you ain't figured to wear long johns?" Shrugging, he pulled his white gloves on and accepted the reins from the old farmer. Flicking them lightly on the two huge rumps as he released the brake, he turned down the snow-packed dirt road, dragged a heavy blanket across his lap, and urged the team into a trot. Counting back, he reckoned it was 22 years since he took over from his father as town Santa. Now, at 60, he owned a tractor sales business, a bad knee from an exploding tire, and a Santa suit. He smiled and shook his head. The canopied darkness of Hyde's woodlot opened to broad snowy meadows and uncountable stars stretching across the sky. Kind of pretty, isn't it, fellas? Socks tossed his head, which Jimmy took as a yes. A quarter mile on, he turned into the cemetery. "Whoa," Jimmy ordered, as they reached the far end. Both horses bobbed their heads and snorted. "Quiet, guys." His eyes drifted up the hill to Stevens' section. "It's not time yet." Then he heard Margaret Reed's contralto singing "Here Comes Santa Claus." As other voices joined in, he flicked the reins and the team headed out at a smart trot, bells jingling down the long, gentle slope and onto the flat behind the Presbyterian church. Jimmy guided them around the building, hearing applause and squeals build as the town square came into view. He called out, "Ho, ho, ho," and waved. At the center of the decorated square, he halted, locked the brake, and stepped out, slinging the two bags over his shoulder. Jimmy ho-hoed his way toward the unpadded stone bench, while parents and children formed a ragged line behind Willard Evans in an elf costume. He sucked in his breath, sat, nodded toward Willard, and the procession began. Within an hour, every child had a gift from Santa, and people began leaving. Jimmy stood by the sleigh, ho-hoing and waving, until only remnants of the choir and a few firemen on cleanup detail remained. "Great job, Santa," Margaret called, as she handed the songbooks to Roger Ellis. Jimmy smiled. "Thanks. Guess I'd better get my reindeer home." He fiddled with the traces, talking softly to the big horses as he worked. "I thought you were leaving." Jimmy looked up to see Margaret standing beside Boots' giant head, stroking his nose. He grinned. "Pre-flight check." She laughed. "I love this night. You know, it's been 34 years. She nuzzled Boots with her cheek. "I started singing here the same year I began teaching." Her gaze grew distant. "The only one I missed was when Harvey died." Then she laughed again. "I was big as this horse with Ginger in 1974, and I still sang." Jimmy noticed her long gray hair against Boots' head. "Your dad was Santa back then." Jimmy nodded. "I used to like to hear you sing." He hooked his arm under Sock's head, resting his hand on the horse's nose. "About all I hear now is 'Here Comes Santa Claus.' I still sing in church every Sunday." "I don't get there much." He stroked Sock's. "Guess I'd best be going before Ezra thinks I stole his babies." Margaret gave Boots one last nuzzle, took a few steps toward the church, then turned back, tilting her head. "Want company?" Jimmy hesitated. "It's pretty cold." "I'm prepared," she said, opening her choir robe to reveal a snowsuit and boots. "Lots better than I am," he laughed, and helped her up to the seat and followed. Laying the blanket across their laps, he released the brake and flipped the reins. Margaret moved closer. "Why do you have both horses?" Jimmy tucked the blanket around them. "Ezra says they're pretty together." "They are. And they have great rhythm with the bells." She hummed a little jingle bells and leaned her head on his shoulder. After a few minutes, Jimmy thought she had dozed. Then she said, "May I ask you a personal question?" He glanced at her. "As long as I can refuse to answer." "Why didn't you ever marry?" He chuckled. "What?" she said, sitting up. "I wonder why women always ask to know that." He slowed the team to a walk as they entered the woodlot. "I asked once. Remember Lucy Boris? It was just after college. We both worked at Dad's shop, and she turned me down." "Did she say why?" "She said she needed more, but she never said more what." "But that was so many years ago." 37 to be exact. "Didn't anyone else come along?" He stopped the sleigh and turned toward her. "I guess I got involved in the shop and time just kind of slipped by. Now I'm playing Santa for other people's kids." "That's sad." "Not so much. I've had a pretty good life." He flicked the reins and the team broke into a trot. "I've just been alone a lot of it. But there's a kind of freedom in it."